Hey guys, wanted to make a quick video about this unprecedented opinion that just came down from the Federal Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in the Abrego Garcia matter. In this opinion, which we will go through, a Reagan-appointed judge recognizes that we are on the precipice, on the doorstep, on the horizon of a constitutional crisis unlike any we've had in our nation's history. Now, we're going to go through these points that they talk about. I'm going to explain why it's significant, but briefly, let me explain some of the procedural background and what this case is about. Abrego Garcia is someone who is in the United States unlawfully. However, he was removed to El Salvador in violation of a court order. There was a non-removal order saying he cannot be sent there, okay? And the Trump administration admits it was a mistake to send him there. Nonetheless, despite that, he was sent to the Counterterrorism Confinement Center, which is basically an El Salvadoran gulag. There's no better way to describe it. It is a notorious prison where people are tortured, potentially murdered by the El Salvadoran government. The conditions of confinement there would radically violate the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution, bar against cruel and unusual punishment, if that prison were actually in America. Now, despite the fact that the Trump administration admits it was wrong to send him there, they're refusing to do anything to try to get him back. Now, this went up to the Supreme Court and it recently issued a 9-0 opinion, the second 9-0 opinion refuting the Trump administration on immigration issue. And it said, you have to do everything you can to facilitate his return back to the United States as if he had never wrongly been sent there. It was also clearly a violation of his due process rights. That's what the other 9-0 opinion was by the Supreme Court against the Trump administration. He was not given a hearing. He was not given an opportunity for a notice and to be heard and to present evidence in his defense. And also is a violation of an immigration court order. Now, despite the fact the Supreme Court issued that ruling saying you have to try to get him back, there was a hearing earlier this week, on Tuesday, I believe, in the district court. And what the court did is said, look, we need to know what you're doing to comply with the Supreme Court order. So she ordered discovery, meaning she granted Abrego Garcia's attorneys the opportunity to obtain documents, to obtain depositions, and to ask questions, written questions under oath called interrogatories, to get to the bottom of what the Trump administration is actually doing, if anything, to try to comply with the Supreme Court's order to get Abrego Garcia back. Now, that's where we are. This case today, this opinion we're going to talk about, is an appeal from yesterday's order giving Abrego Garcia's attorneys the right to discovery. So let's go through it. Now, this is written by Judge Wilkinson of the very conservative Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. He is a Reagan-appointed judge. I want to read some of the portions of this opinion so you understand what exactly we're dealing with. First and foremost, they rejected the appeal because it's an emergency appeal, it's an extraordinary remedy, and they're not entitled to it. And the first thing they said was, while we fully respect the executive's robust assertion of Article 2 powers, we shall not micromanage the efforts of a fine district court judge attempting to implement the Supreme Court's recent decision. So you start off like that, and that's interesting. Usually they don't talk about, they usually don't compliment the district judge in this kind of situation. These usually very dry, very boring opinions. Top of the second page, and this is where we get right to it. It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it's not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of the due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, there's nothing that can be done. And that's the critical thing to understand. The Trump administration's arguments, if you put them together, are nothing more than saying we can take even U.S. citizens, anybody we want, out of America without due process, dump them in an El Salvadoran gulag, and once they're there, they get no court hearing, no due process, and they can literally go to that prison for life for something like a DUI, okay? And this is what they said. If that sounds crazy to you, it sounded crazy to the court. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. And then they go through how, the Trump administration over the past few weeks has tried to assert this guy's a criminal, this is a bad guy. And Judge Wilkinson correctly noted, it doesn't matter if he's a gang member. It doesn't matter anything else. Due process is for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And the people who assert due process are often charged with crimes. They are often criminals. But it is a right that exists for everybody. We don't discriminate based upon what they're accused of, who they are, what color they are, what religion they may be, what their national origin may actually originate from. Okay, so then we go through and it says, trying to interpret and enforce the Supreme Court's decision. And, what the Supreme Court said is you have to facilitate his return. And they, rightly go through and say, listen, the Trump administration's arguments that don't have to do anything and that they don't even have to ask for his return, that's not compliance with the court order of the Supreme Court's order to facilitate his return. Saying facilitation does not permit the admittedly erroneous deportation of an individual from one country's prisons that the withholding order forbids, and further to do so in disregard of a court order that the government not so subtly spurns. Facilitation does not sanction the abrogation of habeas corpus, the transfer of custody to foreign detention centers in the manner attempted here. Allowing all this would facilitate foreign detention more than it would domestic return. It would reduce the rule of law to lawlessness and tarnish the very values for which Americans of diverse views and persuasions have always stood. Now, and it goes through and it talks about we respect the executive branch's assertion of power. We understand that. However, that doesn't matter. Despite the fact, and this is what they say, the executive possesses enormous powers to prosecute and deport. But with power comes responsibility. With power comes restraints. If today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and disregard of court orders, what assurance will there be tomorrow that it will not deport an American citizen and then disclaim responsibility to bring him home? Again, what I just talked about. And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon political enemies? Again, the threat that they could actually say today, oh, it's an illegal immigrant, who cares about due process? Just send him away, doesn't matter. Once he's there, he's gone. We're going to wash our hands of it as if it never happened. Tomorrow, it could be a political opponent. The threat, this is what the court, back to the opinion again, even if not the actuality, would always be present. And the executive's obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed would lose its meaning. And, it goes through this and it talks about how the Trump administration has been attacking the courts. And again, this is something I've never seen before, where basically you have the court in a judicial opinion talking about the attacks upon it and its ability to carry out its mandate under the Constitution. Here we go. The basic differences between the branches mandate a serious effort and mutual respect. The respect that courts must accord the executive must be reciprocated by the executive's respect for the courts. Too often today, this has not been the case, as calls for impeachment of judges for decisions that the executive disfavors and exhortations to disregard court orders sadly illustrate. And it is this atmosphere that we are reminded of President Eisenhower's sage example. And what he's talking about is President Eisenhower did not want to enforce Brown versus Board of Education 2, which was a decision that ordered from the Supreme Court, from Thurgood Marshall, from the Warren Court, saying you have to desegregate schools with all deliberate speed. President Eisenhower disagreed with that opinion, but he nevertheless decided I'm going to follow the court order that I disagree with, even though everybody in my cabinet is telling me to ignore the court. This great man expressed his unflagging belief that the very basis of our individual rights and freedoms is the certainty that the president and the executive branch of government will support and ensure carrying the out of decisions of federal courts. Remember, President Eisenhower was someone who was the commander-in-chief of all Allied forces during World War II. He had seen what had happened in Germany and in other countries when you disregard court orders, when you have a government or an executive that goes rogue. With that experience, he decided, no matter what, I may disagree with this opinion, but I'm going to enforce it. That call to history is so critical and so important here, and it is chilling to see that in a judicial opinion in the year 2025, today. Now, this is, and they go through and they talk about there's inevitably going to be friction between the branches, the judicial and the executive. In what he says in that regard is that now branches often come too close to grinding irrevocably against one another in a conflict that promises to diminish both. This is a losing proposition all around. The judiciary will lose much from the constant intimations of its illegitimacy, to which, by dint of custom and detachment, we can only sparingly reply. Meaning, the courts and the judiciary and the judicial branch, they're not in a position to defend themselves. They don't have spokespeople. They don't go out. They speak through judicial opinions, through these pieces of paper right here. However, they note the executive will also lose much from a public perception of its lawlessness and all its attendant contagions. The executive may succeed for a time in weakening the courts, but over time history will script the tragic gap between what was and all that might have been, and law in time will sign its epitaph. It is, as we have noted, all too possible to see this as an incipient crisis, but it also may be an opportunity. We cling to the hope that it is not naive to believe our good brethren in the executive branch perceive the rule of law as vital to the American ethos. This case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and to summon the best from within while there is still time. That sentence, this case presents their unique chance to vindicate that value and summon the best that is within us while there is still time. Time is running out, is what they're saying. We're about to lose the rule of law in this country. That's what that means. In sum, and for the reasons foregoing, we deny the motion for stay pending appeal, and it is so ordered. Now, I read a few things for you, but you really need to understand how critical, how dangerous, and how poetic in this moment this is. It is an opinion that doesn't change any law. It doesn't create anything in this case other than just denying a request for an emergency appeal. But it is a statement both to the Supreme Court to act more forcefully if this goes back up to a higher level, and also to the lower court that we got your back. We're with you. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. I wanted to summarize this. I wanted to explain how they called upon history, why this is so important, and why it reflects maybe the last chance we have to live with the rule of law in this country as we're used to and as we believe in. Have a great day.